Hello, YouTubers, friend compatriots. Who show desolation, best vassals. I'm a useful idiot, and today I want to talk about a very complex relationship that the United States has with a country called Saudi Arabia. And I'm going to get crazy today and go into quite a little exploration of Saudi Arabia, because I think it's a very important country, and they're at the center of all of these activities around the world. And specifically in these countries that are high profile in the news every day, countries like Syria. And so for that reason it's very important. And another reason they're very important is because they represent two sides of this epic battle that's playing out across the globe, and particularly in the Middle East and Africa. And that is the fact that Saudi Arabia is both an ally of the United States and Israel, but is also the major funder of Al-Qaeda. So they are essentially creating the problem and associating with the solution. Is one way to look at it. But that's a very complex relationship. And then thirdly, one of the things I think that makes our relationship with Saudi Arabia so interesting and important is that we're so critical, or the United States at least is so critical of the governments of countries like Syria and Iran. And yet Saudi Arabia, this close ally, is not much better in a lot of respects. And it's a very strange country in the sense that it's essentially a gigantic military power and a gigantic oil power with an extremely rich elite with a slave labor underclass. And if that sounds like a harsh indictment, then bear with me. And you're going to have to bear with me because this will be long. So the main reason I want to talk to you about Saudi Arabia is because they're certainly very pertinent right now in this situation, funneling arms to Syria and soldiers as well, as it turns out. And the fact that Saudi Arabia is the major funder of terrorists worldwide. And why? How do we know that? So Saudi Arabia is a terrorist factory. And we know that because the WikiLeaks memo came out in 2009 with Hillary Clinton discussing it. And she said Saudi Arabia remains a critical financial support base for Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and other terrorist groups, and supports Sunni terrorist groups worldwide. So you can't get any more clear than that. And this funding of terrorists worldwide also includes Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, as you would suspect. And of course, Qatar is another character that's funding and funneling arms into Syria. And let's get to the actual quote that Hillary Clinton said, quote, "Donors in Saudi Arabia constitute the most significant source of funding to Sunni terrorist groups worldwide," unquote. So that's all we need to know that they are funding terrorists worldwide. And we know that because there's documentation of Saudi Arabia funding terrorism in Chechnya. There's funneling of money to Syria. Of course, there's paying for and arming the Al-Qaeda in that country. And they also helped out in all the other hotspots that we've seen. And Saudi Arabia's ambassador to Jordan recently said in an interview that over 2,500 Saudis have actually entered Syria and are fighting against the Assad regime there. So we have a direct Saudi Arabian influence in that country. And but that said, it's rather interesting as well that there have been Al-Qaeda attacks in Saudi Arabia, and in fact, Saudi Arabia suffered from attacks, but also has a very high record of arrests, and they arrest hundreds and hundreds all the time for supposed connections with Al-Qaeda. And so that's interesting as well, that all the Al-Qaeda are theoretically funded by Saudi Arabians, but also are wreaking havoc in Saudi Arabia. But one of the other things that makes our relationship with Saudi Arabia complex is the human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, of course, rival anything in the region. And let's go through some of these. There's no other faith allowed in Saudi Arabia. There's no other church allowed. If you convert to anything but Islam, there's the death penalty. You're arrested and not informed of your crimes. There's no access to a lawyer. You are abused and tortured in prison. You're presumed to be guilty, and they have secret trials. And punishments can include beheading, stoning, amputation, lashing, crucifixion, and retaliatory surgery. And in fact, between 2007 and 2010, there was 345 executions, and they're all public beheadings. And then in 2012, there was actually an execution for sorcery. So you don't see that every day. And between the 1970s and 2002, over $70 billion has been spent in foreign aid spreading Wahabbi Islam. And that's the Saudi brand of Islam, and is at the heart of a lot of terrorism that we see across the globe. And they are some of the most fundamental of the fundamentalists. So the fact that in the last 30 years the Saudi Arabians have spent $70 billion spreading their message around the world, it's once again surprising that we are allied with the very mechanism for spreading our supposed enemy across the globe. And Saudi Arabia also, of course, works with World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and the International Money Fund. So this is a country that's just because of its oil power, is playing with all the big dogs in the world. And of course they get a place at the table. So going back to the human rights abuses, behavior and dress limits, alcohol is prohibited, no theaters or films are shown, and all of this stuff that of course I'm talking about is not prohibited to the royal family themselves. And it's not like they have a whole lot of reverence for Islam, except in their radical philosophy, because it turns out 95% of Mecca's historic buildings have been demolished. And this is Mecca and Medina, the two holy sites in all of Islam. And yet there's not much outcry about something like that. And over the last 50 years, over 300 historic sites related to Muhammad have been destroyed there. And another thing is polygamy is legal for certain classes there. Men may marry girls as young as 10. And they also have instant divorce available to them. And there's a story of a woman even given 10 lashes for being found guilty of driving. And then I mentioned the slave labor class there in Saudi Arabia, and it's because they have the underclass of immigrant workers there. It makes up a substantial part of the population. In fact, they have 2 million illegal workers and 5.9 million foreign workers total out of a population of 25 million citizens. So very huge underclass there. And reports talk of workers that are 15, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, can be denied their salaries, and of course have to sign in and out with their employers. Domestic workers suffer sexual abuse, and this is a class of 8 million that do all the manual, clerical, and service work. So that's a debt slave class. Well, they're not even debt slave class; they're just a slave class. And judges routinely pass out sentences of thousands of lashes, and judges can arrest and detain anyone. And in 2011 alone, there were 61 executions, including women, children, and the one I mentioned for sorcery, and amputations for petty thefts. So this is the strict kind of Wahhabbi Islam that Saudi Arabia exports along with its cash and weapons to terrorists all over the globe, including all the enemies that we have fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the epic battle in Syria now. So as I like to do, I'm going to give you a little bit more background on Saudi Arabia, because for those who don't really know that much about Saudi Arabia, this will be a quick nutshell history and some fun facts, as I like to say. Like I said, they have 25 million citizens, The Kingdom of Saud was founded in 1932, but struggles began all the way back in 1902, and they're part of the Ottoman Empire. So here we are, the Ottoman Empire again. And Saudi Arabia is considered the birthplace of Islam, and it's an absolute monarchy, and it's the land of the two holy mosques in Mecca and Medina. Oil, of course, is 95% of its exports, and constitutes 75% of their government revenue, and they have a huge welfare state for at least the Saudi class. So they have a slave underclass, they have a sort of a welfare middle class, and then the extremely wealthy royal family. And they're the only country in the world that bans women from driving. So some people here in the United States might think that's a good idea too, so that probably doesn't sound too harsh. But Wahabbi Islam is a strict puritanical form of Sunni Islam, and that's the other part of this quotient is the Sunni, this epic battle between the Sunnis and the Shias. And Saudis, of course, are funding and arming this entire Sunni crushing of Shias in the Middle East. And so the Sunni empire will be created of sorts. And this is very strict Sharia law. And so we find the same disparity in all these countries run by Sunnis, where we have a lot of poverty and a ruling class. So, and as we know, there's a lifestyle amongst the royal family of Saudi Arabia that cannot be equaled. I think they have 7,000. That's right, 7,000 princes. So, of the population of Saudi Arabia, 7,000 of them are princes and have unimaginable wealth, and spend it on pet Bengal tigers and diamond-studded Rolls Royces. And some other good things about them is they're the only Arab nation that has never had national elections ever in history. And they've never had a written constitution. No political parties are allowed. They're the seventh most authoritarian country in the world out of 167. And they just pass on there. For instance, the commander of the National Guard recently was there from 1963. He recently retired, and he just gets replaced by his son. And of course, state wealth and personal wealth are completely blurred. And this is just how it works there. And their history is pretty interesting. In 1938, well, of course, the Arab Revolt in 1916, 1918 was when during World War I, and the famous Lawrence of Arabia episode, and the promise of independence to countries in that region, which, of course, the Europeans backed out once the war was over. But anyway, in 1938, vast oil reserves were discovered in Saudi Arabia. In 1941's oil fields were exploited with the help from the U.S. and the Arabian American Oil Company. And 1973, the Saudis actually led the oil embargo against Western countries that supported Israel. So at that point, they were against Israel, although they didn't participate in the wars. And but they had an oil embargo, and those of us that were there remember it well. In 1975, King Faisal was assassinated. 1976, Saudi Arabia became the largest oil producer in the world. And then the showdown happened between Sunni and Shia when the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979. So this is this rivalry between these two countries has been going on since then. And by the 80s, of course, they had a fully developed bond with the U.S. and United States military because of this adversarial relationship with Iran. And interestingly, Saudi Arabia spent $25 billion in support of Saddam Hussein in his war against Iran. And so this interesting relationship between all these countries, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Israel, have a long, rich history now stretching back 30 or 40 years. And Saudi Arabia condemned the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, and of course got the U.S. to intervene. And Saudi troops participated in that. In fact, Saudi Air Force had 7,000 sorties in that war. So they got to work out their Air Force. And the 1994 is when Saudi Arabia stripped Osama bin Laden of his citizenship. And that was, of course, another interesting connection with Saudi Arabia is the fact that 15 of the 19 hijackers were financed and were from Saudi Arabia. But that's a story for another video, as I like to say. And in 2009, interestingly, Saudi Arabian troops moved into North Yemen and created a buffer zone there. And a little-known episode, so Saudi Arabia has some regional issues. And there's a lot of infighting amongst the family, though, so there's a lot of concern about what will happen to Saudi Arabia in the future, considering what the lineage, what political and religious changes could be brought to Saudi Arabia, the family power struggles. And then, interestingly, too, in 2011, 2012, during the Arab Spring, Saudi Arabian troops went into Bahrain to help put down the Arab Spring there. Another little-known episode of a very oppressive state. While the U.S. supposedly supported all the Arab Springs everywhere else, there was a blackout on what was going on in Bahrain, and it's still going on. And Saudi Arabia spent $10 billion on that episode. And of course, we know women don't have too many rights in Saudi Arabia as well. But speaking of an oppressive state, I don't think it can get much more oppressive than the fact that they have a counterterrorism law now that criminalizes, quote, infringing on the interests of the kingdom or describing the king or the crown prince as an unbeliever, doubting his integrity, defaming his honesty, breaking the oath of loyalty to him, or inciting such acts. I mean, that's quite an homage to their leader there. So I don't think there could be a more tyrannical state on earth other than the one that has that as a credo. And last but not least, one of the things that makes Saudi Arabia interesting and dangerous is the fact that they have a massive military machine. And I'm not sure if a lot of people are aware of that because of the fact that the United States and Israel do all the dirty work, and Saudi Arabia only participates to a certain degree. But they have 200,000 military personnel, 1,250 battle tanks, 1,300 armored vehicles, 3,000 armored personnel carriers, 300 artillery pieces, 1,000 surface-to-air missiles, 300 combat aircraft, with 200 more on the way. They are in the top 10 in the world in military spending, 8% of their GDP. Of course, they get all their weapons from the U.S., Britain, and France. And between 1951 and 2006 alone, the U.S. has sold $80 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia. And if that wasn't high enough a number, in October 2010, Saudi Arabia bought $60 billion of weapons, in that year alone, the biggest arms deal in U.S. history. So that massive military and that funding of terrorists worldwide and that harsh of Sharia law and their agenda across the globe, they're a pretty interesting friend for the United States to be working with. And I don't want to offend any Muslims out there by making any analogies, but as far as I'm concerned, working with an Islamic government like Saudi Arabia is like dancing with the devil. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.